great pleasure to introduce our keynote speakers, Robin McIntyre, European Incentives Director at Corporate Tax Incentives, and Simon Lutzenberger, Head Sustainable Finance Solutions Switzerland at SHG Meridian, and our panel, Ian Robin, Executive Director at Invigors, and basically we'll miss Jerome Tarasca, Senior Manager, Capital Market Agent and CDP. I hope he will join us in a minute. So we are reaching times where, fortunately, banks, private funds, and governments can already meet much of the demand for funding the more established technologies and green projects. However, when it comes to the practical application to finance to support the wider transition, real consideration needs to be given to how we encourage finance to fund other projects, the greening of carbon-heavy industries, and supporting nonsense yet critical initiatives such as green energy transition, battery storage, or vehicle recharging infrastructure. These projects are often complex. Future now technologies can be relatively expensive. So together, together with our experts, we would like to answer few very important questions, I can say. So where and how to find funds for a green transformation. I hope this event will help you and maybe show you different ways and solutions about possibilities for maybe financing your ideas and your green transformation. So I hope this event will be very helpful for you, because as I understand, as I know, it's very important for all of us. So, and I would like to welcome my friend Maria Alejandra Pulido, Latin America and Environment Alliance Director at UTEC, who will introduce European Technology Chamber, its mission and tools it offers for its advocates. So, Maria.
Thank you so much, Marcin. I already put the presentation. I just want to confirm if you can see it.
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So as I told you today, I have the privilege to introduce you to who we are as an organization and what we offer to our members. I believe that one of the most important things is to take into consideration that our main mission, and let's say what is our main focus, is that technology obliges. But in order to be able to accomplish that, we have three major goals, and those would be the competitiveness, the growth, and the sustainability. Exactly as a chamber, what we offer. We don't offer services, but we do have different tools and different programs that were created in order to provide you the opportunity to grow, to expand your business, but do it in the right way. But more than that is to as well create that positive impact somehow. So it's not just about those business opportunities, it's as well how we can make the difference in today's world. Just to give you some of the examples, you will see that in the toolbox we have different events that we run during the year. I will get deeper into that with the next slide. But this is just to let you know that actually we talk about different topics. We invite different professionals with an amazing background, and as it is the case of today's webinar. And with that, we're going to be able to have some insights about how your business itself can be better, how you can work on your value proposition, how can you actually make the difference with your specific product and service. And on the other hand, we have the programs, and through the programs is that you can get even deeper inside this amazing initiative that regards SDGs, that regards climate action. In some other cases, it's more about the recognition, because we would like to recognize all of those that are trying to innovate somehow. So we have trade fairs and programs, some awards, and as well investment forums. So of course, I really will be very happy to provide you more information and more details, and Marcel will do that as well. So just feel free to reach us, and we will give you a better understanding of all these tools and programs. Now, about our alliances. Our structure is made out of 3 different type of sections. The first one is the region alliances, and with these ones, what we try to do is to have a closer approach to that specific territory. As you can imagine, it's not the same to think about climate action or think about manufacturing in China or in Brazil or in Germany. So because of that is that we wanted to have those sections specializing on that specific territory in which we will take into consideration important aspects as it is the culture, the market itself, the economy, and some others. The second type of sections are the impact alliances, and here is where we will go deeper. In here, we will see important aspects as it will require equality, gender equality, let's say, as it would be the case of women in tech, or for example, the importance of policies and strategies that actually will help us to mitigate that footprint that we're causing on the environment. This is an amazing work that we're doing with the Policy Alliance, but not only, as well with the Climate Action Alliance. Another case will be SDGs, and with SDGs, as you can imagine, that panoramic is even bigger because it's not just about sustainability, so as well about social impact and so many others. Then we have the tech alliances, and in here is where we try to specialize 3 industries and as well sectors. In here you will find the smart cities, as well digital transformation, environment, manufacturing, IoT, mobility, and energy. Once again, remember that if you would like to get deeper into all of these, Marcin will be happy to provide you more information. Otherwise, just feel free to reach anyone from our team and we will be happy to support you. As I mentioned at the beginning, we do run different events during the year. Some of them are the summits, expos, and awards. Those are the big events. And so that you can take into consideration what is going to happen next. On the 30th of June, we're going to have the Latin American Age Expo and Awards. As well, we're going to have the China Economy and Technology Expo. We're going to have the Future Technology Global Summit and the UTech Investment Awards. All of this is going to take place in the next months. If you would like to get involved, you can participate as a sponsor, as a partner. You can be part of the audience, or if you would like to be part of the panel, please reach us. We will be happy to have you inside these events. Remember that the most important about this is about sharing knowledge, creating awareness. So please feel free to reach us and ask for more information about these summits, expo, and awards. Then remember that we do have different online events, as they are the webinars, as well networking groups, meetings. You can imagine we talk about different topics, different approaches, and we do this during the whole year, and we do that with different strategies and with different purposes. These are some of the numbers. So as you can see, we have more than 200 webinars per year. We have more than 50,000 registrants, and we have 684 keynote speakers all around these incredible events. Now, as I told you before, we do have these kind of online activities, and we're able to do that is through the Tech Forum. This is our special platform. Through the one we're able to deliver this content, but we do it in a smart and in a very efficient way. So this is a very useful tool, not only for our activities, but as well if you would like to use it for your own events, we can discuss about this. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure for me being here with you. And now I wish you a very successful webinar, a very interesting conversation. And remember that technology obliges. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for this presentation. So yeah, if you have any questions, just reach me or Maria. I will try to help you to understand better what we are doing. So let's just start our webinar about financing the green transition. So our first speaker is Simon Lusenberger. So maybe it's better you, Simon, to introduce yourself to the audience. You for sure will do it better than I. So yeah, the voice, the microphone is yours. I will make you a presenter in this time. Oh, you are a presenter now. So yeah. So.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, let me just start by, I did prepare a small introduction to myself also on the slide deck. So let me just start by sharing the screen. And once that works, it does.
Yes, it's starting, yes. So okay. Full screen and will be perfect. Oh, Jerome is joined. Jerome, you are on a listening mode. You have to switch again the sound button and then open the microphone again. And administrator, please notice that Jerome is joining, so please allow him to use the microphone. Thank you. Yeah, Simon, this is your time. Thank you.
Okay, so let me speak a bit about, well, me, myself, and what I can contribute in terms of financing the green transformation. So my name is Simon Lutzenberger. I'm working for CHG Meridian in Switzerland. My background is actually, well, by training, I'm an electrical engineer, so not in finance at all. I started my career as a network engineer with a focus on Wi-Fi and security. And after, well, my engineering beginnings, so to say, I changed into a couple of sales and business development roles with major vendors in the IT industry, Cisco, HP, Aruba, and PTC or ThingWorx, which used to be a major IoT platform vendor. So over the time, I basically got more and more exposure also to large international companies, and by now, well, the majority of my clients and customers are in that segment. So I do have a bit of a background now also with the challenges that that kind of a company faces typically. So, well, what I do now at CHG is helping my customers and partners with establishing technology usage models for all kinds of technology, either in traditional financing solutions like a traditional operate lease, but also more sophisticated solutions like pay-per-use and as-a-service models. Well, obviously, when working with the Climate Action Alliance, I'm quite passionate about all kinds of green technology. And also with the engineering backgrounds, I like sophisticated technology, obviously. And if it's not about technology, I really enjoy handball. So what does CHG Meridian do? Basically, CHG Meridian is a bank with a very limited business model. So CHG Meridian does technology finance only. And that not just for Switzerland, but basically almost anywhere on the world. So the company really specializes in that. Other than a traditional bank, CHG earns its margins primarily from the remarketing, refurbishing and remarketing of used equipment. So we really help in having alternative usage models that do not aim to use the equipment till it falls apart, but really typically shorter usage terms, still not getting rid of the equipment, but instead making sure that it's being refurbished and reused afterwards. A few numbers, if the slide comes up. Yeah, we are managing about 8.5 billion Swiss francs in assets for our customers. And just to give you an understanding of the size of the challenge, basically, we refurbish and remarket more than 800,000 assets annually. So we do that quite on a large scale. The track record is more than 95% of the returned assets over all the years we get successfully into a second life. So that's really where we earn our margins. So if we don't do that well, that means we're not earning any money. So we really specialize in that part. So you could argue it's kind of a circular business model right from the beginning. Well, when I say any technology, I mean any technology. We have 3 technology areas that we do most of our business in. That's IT, industrial, and medical devices. There are obviously slight variations between those 3 pillars, but generally speaking, it can be any kind of technology. CHG operates not everywhere on the globe, but in a wide selection of countries. So by now we have local operations in 28 countries, but we support our customers also in those countries where we do not have our own presence. And that, well, generally speaking, might present some challenges, as typically the legal framework in each country is different, even though in some countries it's more similar. Like, for example, the EU should have a somewhat similar legal framework, but it can also be, well, major differences depending on geography. And, well, we are here to help with that also. So let me give you a very quick glimpse at what we do and where we earn our margins. This is one of our technology centers. This is from where we manage all the end of use processes, basically, well, managing the logistics for the return of the assets at the end of the use, making sure data is wiped securely from the devices, then refurbishing the equipment and remarketing it. What you see on the photo is primarily IT equipment. That does not mean that we don't do anything else, but, well, a huge production machine or medical devices just would not go into that specific facility. Typically, well, we don't refurbish medical devices ourselves. Just picking that random example, that's what we do with the external contractors who have the appropriate certification for that. So sometimes, well, we don't do everything ourselves. Now, concerning the business model, let me give you a very straightforward example from the IT industry that everyone can relate to, just explaining how that typically works. Let's just take a tablet computer. In this example, might be an expensive one at roughly 1,500 Swiss francs. List price, if you have a very talented person in purchasing, then it might be slightly cheaper for you. What CHG does is basically we take the expected resale value at the end of the intended usage term, in this example, 36 months, and take that off the, well, to be financed volume. So you're ending up paying substantially less than the purchasing price of that equipment. That is just standard IT leasing, but basically enabled by the refurbishing and remarketing of the assets at the end. It also serves to point out that, well, it actually does make a major difference whether the asset is, well, long-lived, good quality, well-maintained over time, not just from a hardware perspective, but also from a software perspective. No one would buy, well, a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone that no longer receives software updates because it's just not safe to operate. You may not want to do your home banking stuff on such a device. So really, if the asset is not valuable, not long-lived, not well-maintained over time, then it just, well, loses value really, really fast. And while this is a very simple example, it really serves the purpose of showcasing what is true for basically any device category. We do that for any kind of industrial application that you can think of, from logistics applications, from, well, all kinds of production machinery, even some very basic stuff like logistics containers or load carriers, like on the picture over here. The same principle applies. If it's rock solid equipment that is long lived and built with a long useful lifetime in mind, then that typically works a lot better in this kind of a usage model. Now, outside of a standard financing or standard lease, what we can also do is repackage this in a kind of a pay-per-use model. So basically just taking the telemetry data that instrumented equipment usually gives and taking that as a billing metric. So removing the calendar, no longer paying a fixed fee per month, instead paying a fee per whatever the appropriate metric might be. And that works really, really well for all kinds of alternative business models. Basically, well, enabling to offer any kind of technology by any kind of metric that you would like to have, not just the month or the quarter or the year, but instead just by the hour or by the energy consumed or by the amount of produced goods, if it's production machinery, or potentially even the number of sold goods. As long as it can be measured, it can be put into a pay-per-use model or into an as-a-service model. But again, well, keep in mind, the assets have to be high quality and they need to be long-lived. The better that requirement is being met, the better such a model works. Which leads me to what does that mean for you, basically? Let me give you some guidelines on what you should be doing and how you can make sure that you actually receive this kind of financing for your technology, be it you as a customer or you as a vendor of equipment. Those models can be applied at both ends. So we can work both with the customer, which we typically do, or we can do that with a vendor to provide this kind of financing to your customers using your products afterwards. So first of all, it's really important to understand what it is that you would like to achieve. And what happens every now and then, specifically when, well, talking about green technologies or use cases that tend to solve the world's problems in terms of sustainability, people get distracted and talk too much about sustainability. And while I'm absolutely in favor of sustainability, from a business case perspective, we need to focus on the economic side of things. So whenever trying to build a business case for financing the green transformation, think about the economic side of things. What is it that you would like to achieve? Is it selling more products, potentially selling into a different kind of a market? Maybe a new geography, maybe selling to an audience that usually could not afford your high quality product, but would go for a cheaper, less efficient alternative. Potentially selling into a new vertical, or maybe getting into an equipment rental model like any kind of temporary use, where assuming you sell a long-lived kind of equipment, very expensive, it's difficult to appeal to that kind of a customer who only needs the equipment for the next year or two. Yet, well, it's important to understand, where would you like to go? Would you potentially want to, well, get into a different kind of a business model, moving away from selling a product, instead selling a service, creating recurring revenue? Potentially also, well, do you want to get into the second life market as a company yourself? Do you maybe think about establishing your own refurbishment business? That is something that, well, we can help with, but it's absolutely necessary to be clear about what it is that you would like to achieve. Definitely, if you go for recurring revenue, potentially into the remarketing and refurbishment business yourself, it's a very appropriate measure also to address margin pressure from the competition that just sells bad quality products or not that good products for a cheaper price point, ruining your margins with a high quality product, then that is an appropriate measure also. Also, from a margin optimization point of view, well, do you want to earn margins like you did in the past with a traditional sale of goods just at the time of sale? Or do you want to earn your margins over time with maintenance, with potentially spare parts, with, well, might be even the second life of the equipment? Might be a different motivation to go for the same objectives, basically. It's just important to keep in mind, doing the right thing is nothing that receives funding. So it's always really, really important to phrase your business case in a way that highlights the economic necessities. Why are you doing this? You would like to earn money. You would like to grow fast. And well, for growing fast, by the way, Robin is going to have some information on that also. Public funding is also there and available. Put that in the context of your business case. How can that make your overall business case better? Well, in the end, serving the overall purpose of having a better, longer lived product, making it accessible to a wider audience is going to eventually serve the purpose of making the overall consumption greener. As long as your business model only works in the long run on venture capital or just on philanthropy, then you need to redesign the business case or the product or both. So we are always there to help you also with that, not necessarily building a new business case or a new product, but we can help you with just providing some insights into how others have been doing it, what we've seen in building similar models with similar markets or similar types of product in the past. So we are here to help. Just keep in mind, you need to have a reasoning for someone in finance. In the end, they are only looking at the numbers, no matter how green your business case might be. It's really important to get that right from the beginning. So, what is a good green product from a financing perspective? It's a product that is designed for a long, useful life. Remember the picture I shared about our technology center. If we can't easily refurbish a piece of equipment, or anyone for that matter, not just us, then, well, there's just not going to be a lot of value left in the equipment after the first customer stops using it. So it has to be easy to upgrade. You should plan for that. And from business case perspective, also make sure that you have a good business model for consumables and spare parts and maintenance. Equipment needs to be able to be maintained over the long run. When equipment is no longer being maintained by the vendor, then, well, basically, it's not good for that kind of a business case. At the same time, while you design the product for a long useful life, or you should choose products that have been designed for a long useful life, you should plan for a short usage term. So it should not be customized to hell. It's really not good to have too much customization. And if there has to be customization, it should be somewhat limited and really, really easy to remove from the product to get it back into a kind of a standard product shape. So it has to be useful for someone else, not just for you as the initial user of the equipment. Also, it helps to have a sufficient volume in a secondary market, not necessarily just for that specific type of machine, but potentially for different brands, different vendors with similar offerings. It really, really helps to have a well-established secondary market for this type of machinery. Then typically it's easier to, well, find a second user for that kind of equipment. Also, well, it makes sense to have a kind of equipment that is probably going to be useful 5 years down the road. Let me pick a random example. I recently had a customer asking for some support with, well, exhaust gas scrubbers cleaning the very dirty exhaust fumes from ships. Well, that is a very nice technology, but I have no idea whether that is still going to be useful 5 or 10 years down the road. Because, well, are they going to be able to run the same dirty fuels that they are allowed to use today? Potentially, the need for that kind of expensive exhaust gas scrubbing is going to go away very soon. Who knows? So that kind of a mid to long-term perspective is really important from a financing perspective. So That's really boils down to understanding your risks quite well. We can help you with that. At the same time, probably you as the user or vendor of the equipment have very good understanding of that also. So I gave you a very quick introduction. Obviously, really, it's important for you to understand we are there to help. Please ask your questions also on the chat window for the panel discussion afterwards. And feel free to reach out also at the end of the show. There's my contact details on the slide. Feel free to take a quick screenshot or look it up on the recording afterwards, or just, well, ask your questions afterwards in the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Simon. Yeah, in contact to Simon, just also you can reach me, and I will be very happy to contact you with Simon. He's a really great specialist and very passionate about sustainability and climate protection. So yeah, I'm working with Simon for over a year, so I know what I'm talking here. I know what I'm saying here. So yeah, really. If you need some context, just read. So now we can give the voice to Robin. As Simon said, Robin is also he will maybe give us more perspective, more information about public foundings. And yeah, maybe Robin, you can introduce yourself. Will be also better than I will do it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, like with Simon, I also have an introduction to my company and also myself. Is the icon? There we go. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully load up the presentation. I put on slideshow mode. There we go. Hopefully you can all see my presentation slides. So my presentation is about utilizing incentives to help financing the green transition. And what I'm going to cover really is just going to introduce my company, CTI International, or myself. I'll talk about some incentives, for the strategy for Europe, specifically aimed towards sustainability and the green transition. And then I'll go on to talking about how you can use R&D cash grant programs to support your developments in R&D, but also demonstration, also capital expenditure. So just give you a bit of background to CTI. So we're founded in 2001. It's a US-based consultancy specializing in tax incentives. We're currently about 180 employees, and basically in the US, they're focused towards sustainability, R&D, employment incentives, and discretionary incentives. They've recently set up a business in Europe to help companies in the European area accessing the right government incentive programs. So a bit about myself. So I'm Dr. Robin McIntyre. I'm the European Incentives Director for CTI International. I have a PhD in chemistry, and I have about 16 years of experience of securing grant funding. Within Europe, I've secured a fair amount in the last 5 years. It's actually becoming more than 50 million euros. And in the UK, I've secured quite a lot of funding as well over the past 5 years. I'm also an evaluator for some of the EC programs, and I'm also an evaluator in the UK, some of the UK funding programs also. So let's go on to talk about the European incentives landscape. I'm going to cover it as quite a big, I guess, give you a snapshot of what's some of the strategies for Europe, what's some of the main funding areas to access. I'm not going to be able to have time to cover everything today, but I just want to make you aware that there are more than what I'm going to discuss in this presentation available. So in terms of incentives, they occur at many different stages in your development. So as you can see here on the timeline, R&D wise, there's quite a few incentives. I will talk about R&D cash grants. As you move along your development pipeline towards demonstration and piloting of technologies, we move towards the sustainability cash grants and sustainability tax incentives. And then as you move into implementation of those technologies, we talk about sustainability incentives for energy efficiency and decarbonisation. So I just want to give you a bit of a snapshot of some of the policies and some of the I guess aid programs that exist in Europe. So regional state aid is really there to support economic development and employment opportunities. And the regional state aid guidelines were set by each member state and it's subject to agreement with the EU. And so that member states can grant state aid to companies to support investments in new production facilities. And it's really aimed towards the less advantaged areas of Europe in order to help companies in those regions extend or modernize existing facilities. And it will also sort of support job creation. And effectively, the rules are governed by each country and have to be approved by the European Union. And so typically the areas that benefit the best are eastern parts of Europe. I've shown here on the slide the map of Europe, which is just about to be updated, showing the different regions. And I'll now go on to talk about horizontal aid, which is slightly different. It's linked in many respects, but horizontal aid really in Europe applies to any industry. It's mainly there to focus on R&D, sustainability and training, and it can come in quite a few different forms in terms of cash, tax grants, tax credits, super deductions, lower tax rates. And it's often there to support SMEs, so small, medium-sized companies. And I'll give you there a bit of an understanding of some of the R&D tax credits that can be sought between 11 to 50%. Cash grants typically can be anywhere up to 100% funded, which I'll go on to talk about in a short while. And effectively, there's quite a lot of money available for sustainability. And again, I'm going to cover that in the next slides. And I think really the key takeaway here is that Western Europe is very good for R&D and sustainability. And if you move to Eastern Europe, it's very good for lots of different things. That's the key take-home message. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about one of the main European led strategies for the green transition. So you may all be aware of the European Green Deal. This is really targeting to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050, and it's going to require significant investment from I guess the European Union, but also the private sector. So through this European Green Deal, they've announced a European Green Deal investment plan. And so what does this actually mean? So it's looking at mobilizing at least €1 trillion of investment over the next 10 years. And the areas of where this money will come from will be from capital from EU and national budgets, public and private investments, and additional measures to facilitate and boost green public and private investment. And this is really tied into the part of the European Green Deal that in order to become climate neutral, it's not just the funding from, I guess, effectively taxpayers' money through European Commission funding. It's also going to be needed to have a fair bit of private investment from industry. So I'll move on to the next slide. Again, where's this money coming from, you might ask? There's at least €1 trillion over the next 10 years. Some of it is formed from the EU budget. Some of it's from InvestEU, which is formed from the European Investment Bank and national promotional banks and financial institutions. I'm also going to talk about the Just Transition Mechanism, which is linked to this European Green Deal investment. And so I just wanted to give you a snapshot of, this is multi-sourced funding from various different areas trying to achieve the same common goal, which is becoming climate neutral. So the Just Transition Mechanism. So this is part of the European Green Deal investment. It's a key tool to ensure transition towards a climate neutral economy, and it should happen in a fair way. This is going to provide targeted support to mobilize this 100 billion, which is part of this €1 trillion euros that I mentioned. And it's really focused again towards the most effective regions, most carbon intensive regions. And it's there to help alleviate social economic impacts of the transition. There are three main sort of areas that are covered under this Just Transmission Mechanism, the Just Transition Fund, which is from a mixture of EU funding and ERDF funding. It's grants for regions to support skill development and economic opportunities for SMEs, startups, and incubators, really in clean energy. There's also the Invest EU Transition Scheme, which is 45 billion euros of investment plus private investment in sustainable energy and transport. And I guess that really is linked to the future of transport in terms of sustainable fuels, e-mobility, electric vehicles, and those types of programs. And also there's a public sector loan facility with the EU Investment Bank, which is also to mobilise a considerable amount of money for investments for district heating networks, renovation of buildings, etc. So that's just give you a flavour of the whole European strategy towards this Green Deal. And I just wanted to give you a couple of examples here of the typical projects that the EU are very good at announcing, disseminating where they're putting their funding. So typically, to things like helping create economic opportunities in mining towns in Poland, helping citizens and businesses cut CO2 emissions, lowering energy bills. In Lithuania, substituting harmful refrigerants in commercial refrigerators with CO2, in using LIFE program, which I'll talk about shortly, and then also things like lowering car emissions by lightweighting of cars. So what you can see here is that there's a lot of different programs, a lot of different project opportunities, and it's all geared towards the greening of the economy, decarbonisation, low carbon, zero net carbon, and those types of programs. So what I wanted to go on to next was just really give you a bit of a top level overview of different areas of funding for the cash grants for sustainability and R&D. And I think it's more important to say why should you consider R&D cash grants? What does it actually mean? So I see this as really as a currency in many respects. It's a strange way to view it, but this is a good way of offsetting R&D costs. So if you're planning to do something in future, for decarbonisation or energy efficiency or a greener technology, this can help pay for the labour, materials, equipment that you would spend on an R&D project that you're already planning to do. And so it gives you opportunity to offset your R&D costs. It's a good opportunity for business development. It enables you to engage with a lot of companies that maybe you might not have been able to engage with before. OEMs, supply chain partners, new customers in new sectors, accessing new markets, giving you the opportunity to work with new companies, and it might get you a foot in the door with a larger company that you want to do business with. It improves the investability of your company. If you're a smaller company, this is very important. If you're increasing R&D, you're increasing the spend on R&D. This is going to enhance how future investors will view you. If you're developing products, services, processes, and you're increasing through that development cycle and getting the technology to a point where investors may be further interested in sorry, I've just clicked on a second. Yeah, further investing in your business. And the other thing is naturally is raising awareness and advertising to the world that your corporate social responsibilities, raising the profile of your company, raising the awareness of your green credentials. Again, I covered this briefly earlier, is what is eligible for cash grant funding. So there are many different types. I'll cover research projects, which is looking at proof of concept to lab scale validation to early stage prototypes, demonstration projects where you might be prototyping, scaling up, doing pre-production trials. There are projects beyond that as well that can be funded. And typically it would fund things like labor, materials, CapEx, subcontracts, if you need to use a subcontractor, other costs of goods and services if you're planning to use a test house, for instance, to undertake some trials, and then travel and subsistence. So I guess the main area of funding in Europe is Horizon Europe. That's the main funding program for R&D. It's got a considerable budget of 95.5 billion over the next 7 years to 2037. It came after Horizon 2020. There are 3 pillars. Open science is the first pillar. I'm not going to cover that one today. Pillar 2, which I will cover briefly, has 6 clusters or 5 clusters. which is where a lot of the collaborative R&D will undertake. And then the last pillar is basically the EIC program, the European Innovation Council program, which is more geared towards SME support. So I'll just touch on it. The pillar 2, the 6 clusters. The ones that probably are most relevant here is cluster 4, 5, and 6. Digital industry and space. So digital and industry are very much focused towards what we call the twin transition, which is the link between digital technology and greening of production processes. Climate, energy, and mobility is naturally, as the title says, it's more about the environment. It's all about energy efficiency. So things like renewable energy technologies, energy storage, CCU, those types of programs, they will fall under that program. And then with food, bioeconomy, natural resources, and agriculture, there's a lot of funding there towards sustainability, bio-based industries, looking at circular economy. So I just want to go through a couple of those quickly and give you some typical project examples. So cluster 4 is really looking at building competitive digital low carbon and circular industry, establishing sustainable supply of raw materials. A typical funding projects there would be anything to do with circular economy, low carbon and clean industries. Again, there's a good link in there to digital technologies, AI, robotics. They're often linked to energy efficiencies in production processes and things like that. So that's gives you a snapshot of that particular program. The cluster 5 is really looking at climate change, making energy and transport sectors more climate and environmentally friendly. Typical projects there would be, as I mentioned, energy supply, anything to do with energy systems, being energy efficient, buildings, industrial facilities, in helping them to become greener, transport, smart mobility, and energy storage. And then the last one I mentioned briefly is reducing environmental degradation, better managing of natural resources. Typical projects there would be environmental observation, biodiversity, and natural resources. So looking at better, more sustainable raw materials, maybe bio-based innovation and circular economy, circular systems. And then just to give you a bit of a snapshot typically of what would be involved. So the typical model here is these are research projects. You often involve a number of partners from across Europe, and also some programs permit the international cooperation, so outside of Europe as well, to Asia, Africa, and Americas. And typically research is funded at 100%. Demonstration projects at 70%. The typical amount of money you get in terms of funding, up to about 8 million euros typically for the project, and that's grant funding. And predominantly they're single stage applications. I won't go necessarily through the evaluation process. Typically the grant, notification takes 3 months, and from 5 months from submission typically is when you would look to start a project. I just want to cover also briefly for any SMEs in the audience. The EIC program is very, very important for SMEs. This is a particular program that's helping SMEs scale up and become market leaders. There's 10 billion available over the next 10 years. This particular year, there's 1.6 available. There's 3 product streams, and they're all really geared around the technology readiness levels. And if you don't know what they are, so it's something that NASA created. TRL 1 is generally an idea in somebody's head, all the way to TRL 9, which is a commercial product in the market. So what the point where your development is, there's different programs available, and all I'd say is the different varying amounts of grant support available, most of which is 100% funded. There are mainly open calls and challenge led. So open means you could submit a project on any topic, whereas a challenge led is really specific to a particular problem. And I'll come on to the next slide to give you an example of what I mean there. So the Pathfinder, which is the very early stage technology development, any sustainable projects would be acceptable in that space. Challenge led, the specific challenge this year is to address green hydrogen production. The transition, which is somewhere between the idea in someone's head to laboratory validation. This transition is how do you get to the next step to get it to scale up and in the marketplace. So these are for any sustainable projects, and the specific challenge here is energy harvesting and storage technologies. And then the last program, Accelerator, this is where quite a lot of the funding is available. This is to help companies scale up and get into the marketplace, accessing the right markets. So again, there's actually 3 programs here available. The open is any sustainable project would be acceptable. There's in the open strategic autonomy, which is a specific challenge-led theme. They're looking at circular approaches to critical raw materials, anything to do with sustainable and innovative processes. And then there's a specific challenge-led, the technology is fit for 55, looking at clean energy conversion, decarbonisation, energy efficiency, safety and built environment, zero emissions, mobility solutions, climate neutrality, and green digital technologies. So as you can tell, there's a lot of different types of projects that would be suitable for greening the greening of Europe and that transition to green technologies, and which is something that we're predominantly seeing certainly in European funding. If I click on, so this program's just been recently announced, the CBE Circular Bio-Based Europe program. It's a 2 billion partnership between EU and the bio-based industries. It's just recently launched, and this is really looking at shifting from non-renewable fossil raw materials and minerals to a circular bio-based production sector. Again, there's quite a bit of funding available this year for a whole number of different projects. So there's research projects, demonstration projects, and I should explain, flagship is basically there for building. The funding is there for building of biorefineries as well. And again, I can cover any questions you may have about this particular program. I recognise I'm probably going through it at lightning pace. Live program I mentioned briefly earlier. This is also another program available. It's a 5.4 billion euro program over the 10 years, divided into 4 categories. I think where this is, they're probably all applicable, mainly circular economy, climate change mitigation, and clean energy transition. And these are really big, large-scale demonstration projects. Typical project size up to 5 million euros available. It's a collaboration again. And I guess throughout the year, there's some deadlines later in the year and next year. But these are types of programs where sustainability, greening of industries or regions is very important. And then lastly, I'll cover the innovation fund. This is really set up in Europe. There's small scale projects and large scale projects, which I haven't covered here. This is really a focus towards innovation projects with significant potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's basically there for first of a kind upscaling to commercial level. It's for capital expenditure and not R&D. So this is where somebody wants to deploy some technology on site to help with the greenhouse gas emissions. So it could be decarbonisation of like glass production, renewable heat for energy intensive production processes, capturing CO2 and storing CO2, maybe production of green hydrogen, conversion of biogas, those types of projects. And typically you can get between 2.5 to 7.5 million of support in terms of a grant for CapEx. And there's some specific criteria, but this is more on the, I think this is, as opposed to the R&D cash grants that I just spoke about quickly, this one's really for the sustainability incentives in the way that it supports CapEx and so what's useful about this is if you're planning to do looking at energy efficiencies or decarbonisation, and you're about to acquire equipment, then this could be a useful mechanism for offsetting some of those costs. And that concludes my presentation. I hope you found that useful. I recognize I've probably gone through that very quickly, but I guess the summary really is there's lots of programs available within Europe to support green technology, green transition, and I'm very happy to answer any questions on this space, and indeed also post this presentation, I'm very happy to jump on a call and explain further how we can support and how we can help you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, as I noticed also, it's a lot of money. It's coming from Europe, I can say, from European Union. So yeah, if you have any questions, just write it on the chat, or you can also reach me or Robin. But also we have here our panelists, so we'll try to start this panel. And Jerome, if you are with us, also if you can just open your camera, and maybe during this we'll be waiting for Jerome. Maybe Ian, do you have something to add, maybe from other perspective, because we have a Simon and Robin, like private, like banking and public. Maybe you have something to add for us.
Yeah, well, the trouble is, Marcin, where to start? I mean, I think Simon did a very a very good job of kind of explaining, I think, how people look at projects and look at opportunities, particularly when it comes to let's say regular flow of equipment. So that's one end of the spectrum. I think when it comes to financing, the green transition, which is the broader topic, it's probably good to take maybe a tiny step back and think about the things from a number of different perspectives. And I think the different presentations that Robin gave and Simon illustrated quite nicely that Robin was talking not exclusively, but to a large degree around, I would say, novel approaches, new technologies, R&D led activities. That there was obviously mention of funds supporting implementation around topics such as energy efficiency, and that's important. But I think it kind of does hit on some of the challenges that you see in the domain at the moment, which is there's a huge amount of innovation, which is positive, clearly, and necessary, but it does create challenges from a financing perspective, and migrating from R&D and, let's say, scaling situations, which was, again, not exclusively what Robin was addressing, but to an extent it was, through to, mass volume, major investments being unlocked, which is more the realms of the traditional finance companies, the banks and the leasing companies. The migration between those two domains is difficult. I mean, let's be honest and straightforward about it. There's risks there, which are difficult to handle, and it's really worth being aware of what they are. And I think, Robin, again, for the people who may be less familiar with the jargon, the technology readiness scale is an important one to understand, because there are banks who simply will not invest in projects if they're not at a certain level along that scale, whereas there are others who might be more flexible and will take a view more on the track record. Let's pick on the energy services market. They'll look at the ESCO and say, what's their track record in delivering solutions? And they'll be less concerned than some of the more traditional banks might be about how the problem is solved, and having more confidence and taking a stronger view on the actors. So it's a very, very broad topic, as you said, Marcin. I think there are some asset classes which we maybe haven't touched on so far, which we can perhaps come back to, which are also have a very important place, in the transition, and we perhaps haven't touched on today. But I'm conscious I've whittled on for probably too long, so I'll draw a line there and continue the conversation later.
Yeah, and we have a Jerome here. I already made some introduction. Maybe Jerome, you can just introduce yourself and about your company and your company, and because you are working with a lot of companies, like as I know, more than 13,000 of companies. And maybe do you have some like other perspective for this, Jerome?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I represent the NGO CDP, formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project, and indeed, it's a very powerful NGO that you may not have heard of, although one of the most powerful NGO in the world, because it's the main data repository for companies to disclose their environmental impact, but also their environmental transformation. So it's basically what CDP does. They send a questionnaire to thousands and thousands of companies who report and answer questions about what type of green products do they offer, what is their climate governance, who is actually making decisions about climate issues, but also they report their risks and opportunities related to climate, for example. What is the objective in terms of reducing emissions for a company, but also disclosing their emissions. So it's for 20 years, it's built a very comprehensive database of environmental data. And it's used by companies as a tool to transform and to go towards a more green business. A quick word about why companies do that, right? It's not because we ask nicely or because we're an NGO and we are friendly. It's because actually the requests we send to thousands and thousands of companies are backed by banks and by investors. So pension funds, insurance companies, asset managers. So together they form a coalition of investors and banks, and they sign the letters that are being sent to more than 20,000 companies in the world, asking them to report on their emissions. So I'm bringing here a perspective that is a bit different from what we heard. I think today is more considering your company as a whole entity. We're not so much doing work on project finance, but more about what your entity is doing to be transparent about its impact, but also reducing its impact.
Yeah, so your I can say reports can be used by banks, or so can banks are using those reports.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's basically how we work. We accept, like, banks support these letters sent to companies asking them to disclose, and then in exchange we share this information. By the way, this information is also shared publicly, so any one of you can go on cdp.net and create an account for free and read what Unilever or Total Energies or Exxon has responded to CDP questionnaire. This data is also accessed by banks indeed, who are using the raw data that is collected by CDP. So to give you an idea, each company reports on about more than 1,000 data points. So it's pretty heavy for a company to respond to a CDP questionnaire, but then it gives a lot of information to the banks. Then banks use two types of information for different purposes. At CDP, we have the raw data, so what are the raw responses by companies on the questionnaire, but we also rate companies. So we also what we call an ESG rating provider, because we also give a grade, a rating to companies that reported their data through our platform. The rating methodology is public, it's completely open source, so companies know what they need to do to improve their rating, and that's the theory of change there. The ratings are just a mechanism to encourage them to be better. So to be better, they have to put in place some good practices, such as getting their GHG emission, the greenhouse gas emissions, audited by a third party, or they have to set targets to reduce those emissions, but not targets that come out of thin air, targets that have also been validated independently and that are scientific. So there are a range of best practices that need to be in place. Another example of those good practices, and maybe interesting for for the technology sector is often the emissions are not necessarily present in the direct operations of a company. So a good practice from a company that is expected from banks, that the banks expect of companies, is that companies also engage in the supply chain, that they actually talk to their suppliers and ask their suppliers to be more transparent and to reduce their impact. And then to answer your question, Marcin, then banks would use these ratings, would use the raw data, and that's how more and more, and that's the direction we see that banks are taking. It's more and more embedded into their decision to finance clients. So a couple examples, we see more and more banks creating what we call sustainability linked loans, meaning that they offer a credit line to a company and the interest will be indexed on the environmental performance of that company. And if the company does well, then they pay less interest. So we see more and more of those products.
Basically, I did two workshops for top management of two banks, I can say France banks, with the green logotypes. Maybe I will not mention the names, but two banks. And basically, we were participating in a top management conference. And the main strategy for those two banks is like in 5 years, stop investing, stop crediting unsustainable projects, only sustainable. So they are it was really like interesting how the strategy of those two banks, that they are like trying to stop investing with all those, I don't know, mining fossil fuels and things like this. So it's going, I can say, and the conclusion is that there's a huge like future for the banks with all the green transition, because it's really huge market to change. So yeah, but Ian, maybe you have something to add to Jerome, what Jerome said.
Yeah, I mean, again, very thought-provoking, and lots of ideas come to mind when we get into these types of topics. Around what's genuine benchmarking and comparing like for like, and I suppose the cynic in you asks, can people game the system, and how do you protect against that, and how do we make sure that we have fairness? I think the comment about the supply chain is a particularly interesting one. I think there's a lot of sectors even who probably are not very keen for the full picture to be disclosed there. And then the other point that immediately jumps to mind is what you were saying, Marcin, about people migrating away from certain industries or certain classes. Again, I think you've got to be very careful about unintended consequences of moving down a path that might be very binary. We have industries that are very heavily energy intensive and resource intensive. If we have banks and funding sources who categorically refuse to play in certain domains, you may end up actually slowing down the transition in some areas and adoption of certain technologies, which we should have in place. So again, how you define policies to ensure that we actually get the right outcomes, very, very important. I think that we don't end up effectively offshoring certain industries to certain parts of the world, which certainly has happened in my lifetime as a consequence of government policy. You just essentially moved the problem somewhere else, and in fact maybe exacerbated it. So that's my immediate reaction.
Yeah, Jerome, guys, you can just talk. Add your opinion. Don't wait for my questions. If you have any questions, just or opinion, just give us. And we have some reactions on public chat, so maybe we can just also.
I'll address that the question from Eunice as well. But first, bouncing on Ian's point, I think is absolutely correct, and I agree. It's not about stopping financing to high-emitting industry. We will need energy, we will need cement, we will need steel in the years to come. So from the NGO's point of view, we do work with high emitting sectors actually, and these are the one where we put most of our efforts because they are the one who need the transition. And it's the same idea that we see from banks and investors around the world. It's ensure that indeed excluding from their either financing or investment as a whole sector can have a direct impact on this sector to transform, because the risk would be that this sector is going to seek finance from other investors in other part of the world that may not be so involved in the net zero transition. So it's important that that there's a dialogue that takes place between the bank and their client. And it's important that the bank is equipped to have an informed conversation with the client. So one of the important asks that we incentivize the banks to ask their clients, for example, is to see from these high emitting sectors and high emitting companies to seek targets that are scientific targets. So to seek commitments from companies so that they are on the path to net zero, and then of course ensure that emissions are reduced at the path that is required for them to be on a net zero trajectory. So we do a lot of work on that front at CDP. Thanks to the data that we collect on targets disclosed by companies, we actually able to assess what is the degree of alignment of specific companies based on its target. So it's just another way for banks and investors to say, okay, what are the ambitions of these companies, and how can we incentivize them to be more ambitious in their emission reduction. So it's really about identifying high intensive companies and getting them to reduce these emissions.
I would like to chime in here, right? I definitely support Ian's point that we should make sure that we do not cut off specific industries from funding opportunities, because, well, particularly dirty industries probably are the ones where we can have the biggest impact from a sustainability and green perspective, to make sure that we substantially reduce emissions as we go, just by making sure that they get the opportunity to move to a different, or potentially gradually shifting the business model, but then in their traditional operations becoming substantially more energy efficient. And the process industry as a whole, where oil and gas is part of that, basically, is, as a rule of thumb, largely inefficient because of the way that they have been operating plants for decades without changing, well, material components of the plants, keeping them up and running 24 hours a day. It's really hard to do upgrades in that kind of an environment. Therefore, there's lots of inefficient, decades old equipment still up and running. While using equipment for a long time basically is a good idea, but then being stuck with very inefficient equipment, inefficient processes is not a good idea. Clearly, there's a big opportunity to make, well, a bigger impact in those particularly dirty industries.
Yeah. So yeah, we are talking a lot of about banks, but I know that there's also problem to get funds from EU because of hundreds of documents. It's unbelievable sometimes how long way you have to make to get the fund. And basically, maybe you have some I can say ideas, solutions, Robin. How to do it. Maybe your ideas, the best one to for the companies who are looking for those funds. You're on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, apologies. Absolutely. So yeah, in terms of advice for companies, and of course you can apply on your own. It's as you rightly said, it's very complicated. It's time consuming. It's very not easy to navigate. The European portal. This is where companies like myself come in terms of the consultants that are specialists, have done it for a number of years. I would very much advocate hiring a consultant to help and assist with the access. They can navigate the process very quickly. They can apply more efficiently. Yes, it does take time. They will know the information requirements in order to build that credible picture. I guess what I do is what I likened it to. It's storytelling, really. It's about proposing something in terms of the technology development. It's got to have as Simon alluded to earlier, it's got to have a really credible business case. It's got to have some financial viability about it, but it's also got to have the right environmental credentials, as we rightly say, in terms of how you're using that technology for the greater good, as it were. And I also agree with what you're also saying about, we should be focusing on helping those industries that are really hard to decarbonize, to help them reduce their emissions or be more energy efficient. And it's often the case if they don't have the time to look at what other technologies are available that may help them. And you can use grant funding to explore and to adopt certain technologies, transfer technologies to your sector. And I've done this quite a few times with sectors that you think, well, how do you help that industry, or how do you help that particular company become greener? And it is possible. It's not always possible. But it is possible with some sectors to help them partner up with an organization they've never even heard of technologies that they've never even heard of. So part of my role is, some of it is technology scouting, some of it is making those connections, but also it's helping the companies access the right government programs. If I don't think something's applicable, I'll say so. I won't take that. There's no point in proceeding with an application if you don't think there's any merit in doing so. So that's been the first step in terms of the fact finding with a client, marrying it up with the right incentive programs, and then applying. And so, in terms of tips of the trade, I would advocate hiring a consultant. Of course, naturally, that's why I'm in business. But it is easier to work with a consultant to navigate the funding world for somebody that hasn't done it before. It does take time, it does require expertise, and also because I've sat both sides of the fence, as it were, I've applied for grants, I've also evaluated the grants, I've got insider knowledge as well about what they're looking for. So that's where I come in, or my company comes in, or other consultancies come in. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, for sure.
May also make it a bit easier to receive traditional financing through a bank, because basically it's substantially reducing the risk that you're failing with your overall project when you have someone specializing in making sure that you actually receive the government funds. And even when that might be a lengthy process and take some time, getting a bridge funding for the time frame till that actually happens, till you receive the grant, that's then a lot easier when you have someone who really, really understands what they are applying for.
Yeah,
I think one other thing that just jumped to mind, really, it's not quite the same point that Simon was making, but I think it's additive. A lot of the banks and a lot of the leasing companies do have a strong focus, as you'd expect, on this whole topic. They do access some of these same sources of funding more directly. And it also ties in a little bit to what Jerome was mentioning earlier around, sustainably linked financing products. Some of the leasing companies that we work with do go directly and access this cheaper funding, and are able to share the benefits of that directly with the end customers. So that's another maybe more direct way of, and more straightforward way of accessing some of this funding. Again, not wanting to do the direct grant type programs out of business, because it clearly has a different role to play. But that's another way of potentially profiting from the sources of funding.
Mm-hmm. So, Simon, as I see, it's a probably question for you on the public chat. We have heard how ESG can be positively impacted by tech financing through specialist lessons, such as CAG. How can leasing of other equipment to SMEs drive better performance in this area?
Well, I guess the question is targeted as at the SME part,
Yeah.
right? So, well, generally speaking, whenever you can make sure that equipment is being reused, then that is going to have a net positive impact. So whether it's a large customer, a smaller customer, that basically doesn't make a difference from that perspective. Clearly, the bigger impact from our point of view is happening when that kind of a model is being offered by a vendor, because it's more easily accessible to many small SMEs without a lot of contractual hassle and getting all that set up, which typically is a one-time exercise that everyone has to go through. When that is already kind of pre-built in a vendor-sponsored standard model, then it's easily accessible to a lot of customers. Well, if you have to do that on a one-by-one basis, working with lots of individual small SMEs, then that is probably going to be a painful exercise and not going to be that easily accessible to all the SMEs. Well, Ian has a lot of experience with working with vendor-sponsored programs in that background. I do a bit of that with some vendors also. But
yeah, very very quickly, and sorry, I didn't want to cut in because Marcin, I could see you had a question for Jerome, but just keying into what Simon was saying, Marcin, I think it maybe ties to the point that I made earlier around different equipment classes are absolutely ripe for being tackled as well. CHG, as Simon identified, big focus on technology, but you see the transition, omnipresent, particularly at the moment. You see it in shipping, you see it in heavy transport, and I think one of the interesting features, despite the technology challenges that exist in all those areas, and again, which Simon mentioned with the scrubbers example, the price point is so high for some of these current generation technologies. It really is essential that a financing solution accompanies the capital equipment, because we have examples in the truck segment where equipment's 3 times the price of its ICE comparable. So in that sense, the OEMs, it's essential for them to find a financing solution that can give end customers access to the equipment at a compelling price point, and in part it comes down again to what was being said earlier about residual values. That's something that the OEMs can bring to the table in a vendor finance model, potentially. But anyway, sorry, I didn't want to cut across Jerome.
Jerome wanted to add something.
Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, it's a good question, and I agree with both Ian and Simon there. I think that also a very simple way to address this from a general perspective. If you are a provider of green technology, you obviously can help your clients that have themselves committed to net zero. Maybe they've set themselves what we call a science-based target, meaning that they have a 5-year objective to reduce emissions, and they need to deliver on reducing emissions in their whole value chain. So if you actually can help them do that through your technology, then they might be interested as well in participating in financing the technology, and that will have an impact on positive impact on improving their ESG rating. So that's definitely an avenue there. And I wanted to maybe take this opportunity to answer Eunice's question about how does CDP ensure that the data provided by major oil companies is correct. I mean, it's a very good question in the sense that CDP does not audit the data that is collected on behalf of investors. But 2 ways to answer these questions. First of all, because we are mandated by banks and investors, an oil company could lie. Technically, they could lie, like other companies could lie to their shareholders, to their banks. That would be scandalous, but it has happened in the past. But it's a big thing, and actually in some jurisdiction that would be also completely illegal. So they would face legal sanction. So it is technically possible, but very risky for a company. The second answer is that in the questionnaire, we provide the opportunity for companies to actually attach to their, for example, to their emission disclosure, a third-party audit. So we do not do auditing ourselves, but they can actually join the auditing of another company, so that they ensure that their emissions disclosure is correct. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I've seen Robin, you already also answered Stefan about Australia, projects in Australia. So we know it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that just it's not a no. I guess some calls do specifically require international cooperation. Typically, it's the fundings for EU member states and associated countries of Europe, which now UK is allegedly on that list. But for Australia now, I would say it probably isn't feasible, or you're not eligible for funding in European programs. I do know the Australian programs as well, so there are some there also. But I'm happy to have a conversation about anything specific that you might have, Stephen. So.
Yeah, so I see another question to Robin, so maybe you can just read it and maybe answer Suzanne, because she have I see correctly some, I can say, question exact to you, but basically we are going to the end. Finish at 10:30, so maybe you can just contact Suzanne directly.
Yep, I will do.
Of course, if you have any questions to our speakers and panelists, just reach me. You can just, I will send you all the informations. Maybe you can just also send your email addresses here on the public chat, so there will be possibilities to contact you. So now I have some small gift to our speakers. It's a kind of our tradition that we are like, it's a kind of thank you for your effort and your time spending here with us this 1.5 hour, and of course preparing your presentation. So we because of the tree planting project in the European Technology Chamber, we can announce that we have a tree certificate for Robin McIntyre. That it means that we will plant 10 trees for each of you in our project. So you will have your own trees in Africa. So Robin McIntyre, the next one is to Ian Robertson. Next one is from Jerome Taraska, and the last one is for Simon Lutzenberger. Where is it? Or here? Yeah, we see it. It's for Simon Lutzenberger. So of course we will send it to you. Thank you very much for your time. It's yeah, we were talking about funds, banks. I thought maybe it's not very, I can say, hot topic. Maybe now it's a hot topic, but it was very interesting. I can say so. Basically I live in Poland. So as Robin mentioned, there's a lot to do in Poland, and there's a lot of basically money to spend. And I hope we'll do it. And I know that we don't have time to do it, but basically I hope there will be great projects, green projects here in this part of Europe, and basically in the whole Europe. Thank you very much for your time. Next month we'll be talking about really different topics. So just stay in touch. Thank you all. Thank you, Ian, Jerome, Robin, Simon, and all of the attendees. And yeah, I wish you all the best and great rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.